Hello everyone and welcome. Sit back, relax, make a cup of tea or whatever you like to drink and get ready for new stories from Yellow Cat. Send your own favorite stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. So subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. Let's get started. Bosses of Reddit. What's the craziest thing a worker's done at work? Did you fire them? Not the boss, but he has told me the story. They hired a guy as a network tech and gave him a company credit card in order to buy necessary supplies and tools. Some of you may already know how this is going to end. In the very first billing cycle, the card is charged about $8,000. Of course, this made our accountant look a little funny. They ask the guy what he bought with the money when they call him in. He said, "Well, my family needs to eat, right? I need to make sure that my girlfriend and I have food, clothes, and that the rent is paid. I also bought some patch cables and a new set of tools." The guy used the company credit card to pay his rent, groceries, car insurance, and his girlfriend's shoes and clothes. He also put gas in his truck. He did get fired right away. They also instituted a probation period on when people would be issued company cards and also restricted non-essential office supplies, aka office food, to reimbursement, meaning you buy it with your own card and you submit the receipt for reimbursement. As an extra job, I was a first sergeant for the last 2 years of my time at the USAF. Someone was court-martialed for being late to work. Does that sound harsh? It was, but he was the only one to blame. He had a history of being late, so he joined my squadron after tech school. Article 15 of the UCMJ said that he was punished without going to court, and when he graduated, his training squadron commander erased the records. The first sergeant in his training squadron called to let me know. He was late to work a few times in the next 2 weeks. Just some 15 to 20 minute breaks. Nothing too bad, but enough to make me pay attention. Letter of counseling, the lowest level of punishment other than a slap on the head, was the first thing his boss did to take administrative action. This young man and I also talked. I told him that I knew about his past at technical training, but that I didn't care as long as he went to the bathroom with a group of people. After that conversation, he told me, "Sergeant KD, bad things just happened to me." This made me think he was hopeless. After about a week, he was again late for work. Heard the conversation between him and his boss in the boss's office and saw him read and sign a letter of reprimand, the second level of administrative punishment. I told him that the LOR was the last step in the administrative process and that if he was late again, we would move on to harsh punishments. He was late again a few days later. It was no longer his boss's job to handle this. It was now up to the SQ commander. He chose to issue an Article 15 and told me to have the airman come in the next day in dress blues to officially accept or decline it. An Article 15 is not a court order, but it does include punishments like fines, restrictions, and extra duty. If an airman thinks he's being offered one by mistake, he can ask for a court-martial instead. The next day, I told the boy to be in my office at 12:45, 15 minutes before the commander would see him. I know what you're thinking. You think he asked for a court-martial? Nope, he was late. The dumbass showed up late to get in trouble for being late. I was told to start the discharge process by the commander because it was clear that this person wasn't fit for military service. He and I were amazed that this turd made it through both basic and advanced training. More to come on this. When the airman showed up, the commander gave him Article 15, which he accepted. That being said, why did he go to battle? The commander told the airman that he was going to be let go after he signed Article 15. He also told him to be very, very careful from that point until his discharge papers were completely filled out. He told the boy that if the airman messed up again, it would set a very bad example for other people. The commander didn't do anything because the airman was going to be fired anyway. His words were clear. You will go to jail if you show up late again between now and when you get out. Do you know what took place? It's true, he was late the very next day. You will go to jail right away if you don't follow the rules and don't get the $200. Also, I found out how he got so far. I got a call after the lad received his Article 15, which, remember, was actually his second one. The call was from his mother. Turns out, she and our hero's dad were both active duty Air Force. She was calling me to ask why her son had received non-judicial punishment for being a few minutes late to work. What an idiot. I wasn't in charge at the time, but that was the craziest thing I ever saw. I used to work for AOL as a tech support rep on the phone in the mid-1990s. They had a pretty tough training program that taught you everything about the service, as well as modems, Hayes commands, and Windows quirks, COM port shifts, IRQ conflicts. You were paid to learn the job for 6 weeks, and there were tests every so often, I forget how often, that you had to pass in order to keep your job. Since I knew all of the trainers and my husband was one of them, I used to volunteer to help out in the training classes by running customer service role plays and sometimes giving grades on tests. One of the trainers showed me this woman's paper one day. It was clear she couldn't read or write, and we couldn't believe she had been hired. After a day or so, I'm on the phone and go to the bathroom. As I'm leaving, I see the woman I just talked about coming in. I smile and nod, and then I see her trainer outside ready to meet her. I look at him and ask, "Is she?" And he said, "Yeah." 2 seconds later, we hear an almighty ruckus in the bathroom, screaming, yelling, bashing, and another lady scuttles out and indicates the poor lady was going berserk in there. They had to drag her out in a half Nelson while she was still screaming. Everyone on the call floor closest to the area stood up to see what was going on. Looked like a prairie dog town. The next day, we were talking about what happened in the trainer office area, and one of the guys remarks that he saw her when she was waiting to be interviewed. She was wearing a dress and pulling the skirt part of it up over her head like little kids do. Still no idea how she got hired. Reddit. Who has an a-hole neighbor / HOA? What's your story? Solar panels were put up for us. Our neighbor in the back has a beautiful view over our house to some nearby mountains. He must have thought this would get in the way of the view, even though the panels are flat on the roof and all they cover is our boring brown shingles, but he didn't tell us this at first. Instead, he drove up in his pickup truck with a friend, pretended to be a city inspector, and spoke to them. The worker had to stop until they could show they had permission. The permit is kept at City Hall and is not something that people carry around with them. They stop what they're doing, call the main office, and start the process of trying to get a copy to show what's going on. In the meantime, the neighbor called the HOA and told them to stop because they never asked his permission. As a courtesy, we had already gotten permission from the HOA. However, in Arizona, an HOA is not allowed to actually stop anything about solar installations. That meant we were also safe there. There's still a chance that the city inspector is real, but I have no idea who is due this. He decides he needs to come see me in person while we're rushing to get the paperwork we need. "We need to talk about this man-to-man," he states. He's about 70 years old, but he's yelling at me like a drunk bar patron who wants to fight. After that, he takes me to his house to show me the view I make worse. I let him know that the only thing that's different is that we can see fewer shingles, but the view is still clear. He then says, "I'm worried about the glare," which is a valid concern. However, this can't happen because of how the earth and sun work and where our house is. I hear his wife say she knows I'm not from around here, but that the sun moves around in the sky. I tell her that it's always facing south, but she says it's sometimes facing north, which is a problem because of the glare. His next words are, "You're ruining the character of the neighborhood." A neighborhood where a lot of other homes already have solar panels and a lot of them are on the front of the house because that's where they work best. I calmly try to persuade him that each of his random objections is not a big deal. For those of you who don't think he likes the way solar panels look, I tell him that his back hedge only needs to be about 10 inches taller so that he can't see our house at all. He can only see the mountains beyond it. He seems to give up now, but he has one more thing to say. "Promise me you'll think about this for a while before you do it." I promise that this will help calm things down and get me out of there. I agree. After giving it some thought for 2 hours, I decide to go ahead with it and call him back. He begins with, "We all have to live with the consequences of our actions and choices, and I hope you can live with the consequences of yours." He adds, "If you really wanted to help the environment, you'd kill yourselves." We used to pretend to be city officials, yell at the HOA, and call the solar company's headquarters in another city to yell at them. Now they're making threats and telling me to kill myself. Now I call the police and make a report. They come back the next day and finish the job. Surprisingly, we haven't heard from him in over a year. No sneaky damage or sabotage. For preface, I live in a 55-plus community with my significant other and his mother who owns her house. The house next door was rented by an old woman and her daughter when she bought her own. The daughter had 4 months to find a new place to live after her mother died. As soon as the daughter got back home, she curses out loud about leaves and other things while working in her backyard. Esso's mom could hear her. That didn't make sense until the daughter asked Esso's mom a few days later to ask the yard guys to stop blowing leaves over the fence. That's not what the yard guys were doing. This woman is more aggressive than passively aggressive because she doesn't understand how nature works. I guess she had a grudge after what happened with the leaves. The neighbor woman chose to move Esso's mom's trash cans to a different street. I can't say for sure that it was her, but I think it was. The third strike was the biggest of all of them. Keep in mind that this woman had been in the house for 4 months after she was supposed to leave. It's not like we were going to report her or anything. There's a housing crisis going on. Then, the neighbor woman called the police and gave them a false report that Esso and I's car had been left behind. This crazy jerk of a woman had a garage and a driveway that was long enough for 2 cars, but GD it, that parking spot on the curb next to her driveway was hers. Our lot only has a half driveway and Esso's mom uses the garage. The other neighbors had to park on the street too. If we didn't park where we did, we had to park a block away, which made it hard for people leaving the neighborhood to see. In one day, this woman called the police 3 times. The first officer wasn't sure what he was doing, so we almost got towed. Due to his role as title, my SO had to take an hour away from work to clear up this whole thing over the phone. After the big deal with the police, we called and made a formal complaint about her living there illegally and the bad shape the landlord had let the house get into. Both of them were brought before the city council and the HOA board. The neighbor was kicked out and the landlord can only rent to family members from now on because the last renter no longer qualified for the grandfather clause because she moved out. Our guess is that the landlord will have to sell. Don't F with bears when you shouldn't even be in the woods. He said he would sue me. My neighbor first came over and yelled at my wife, whom he had never met, that my sprinklers were flooding his yard. In spite of him yelling at my wife, I went outside to check on my sprinklers and see if there were any issues. I did this to be a good neighbor. Even though I didn't see any problems, I started to look into it because things were still flooding for both of us, and he insisted that his sprinkler guy had told him it was my fault. I had to replace some lines, change some sprinklers to ones with a smaller watering range, make sure nothing was spraying toward the property line, and cut down on the time it took to water. I thought I had fixed the problem because I had watched my sprinklers run and not seen any extra water pooling. The next day, he comes over and bangs on my door yelling that my water's going to damage his pressure-treated woodshed and that he was going to sue me if I didn't let him go dig up my sprinklers. He also made a few other threats against me in front of my kids. "Go F yourself," was my quick response. I then flipped him off and slammed the door in his face. I watched both of our sprinklers run and took a lot of pictures over the next few days. It turns out that his slopes toward his shed and the soil is very packed down, so when he runs his sprinklers, most of the water goes to one spot and floods both of us. A week after they said they would sue me, I got a complaint from our HOA against me. When I replied, I told them everything that had happened except for what I had learned about his water. They quickly replied that they were not interested in the complaint and would leave it between us. I didn't tell him about his water because I want him to take this to court. I'll hire one of my friends who's a lawyer and has already said he'll do it for free because I owe him a case of beer. We'll show how I've strengthened the property line on my side of the fence and how he's still being flooded. And then he'll have to pay my friend's lawyer fees. New information. Oh yes, he sued and as I predicted, he lost and had to pay. Thank you for subscribing, the likes and comments. We're very happy to see you all in the comments too. Thanks for your support.